defendant, Ms. Hayden Duran.
Mr. Rand, please raise your right hand. You just swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Of course. You may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, I'm Hayden Duran.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Duran?
Well, I'm the Director of Information Technology at our local hospital.
How are you involved in today's case?
Well, Andy Park claims that my parenting led to the death of her daughter, Sydney.
And what's your relationship like with Jesse, your son?
Jesse and I are inseparable. It's just the two of us, so I try to spend as much time with Jesse as possible. It's hard, but we do what we can, and I just do everything possible to make the best life for Jesse.
And what about your relationship with Mrs. Andy Park?
We were colleagues at the hospital a while back, and we became really good friends. When the house next door to ours went up for sale in Fairview, she was the first person I called, and they moved in a couple weeks later. Her daughter, Sydney, was really close to Jesse.
You said they were really close. Could you explain their relationship a little bit to the jury?
The two were inseparable. Right when they moved next door to us, they met, and that was it. From the time they were 5, they were running back and forth between our two houses. We even put up a little gate in our backyard so they could just run through that and go to each other's houses. And as they grew up, they took a liking to video games.
What sorts of video games did they play?
Oh, all sorts of games. Racing games, sports games, the little Mario Kart game with the steering wheel controllers. And Jesse picked up an interest in the military, so they played war-themed games.
Did Jesse's interest in these war-themed games worry you in any way?
Well, some of the games had a more mature rating, so I would play the games first. I would sit down and make sure they were age-appropriate, something Jesse would be allowed to play. And after that, Jesse and I would actually play the games together. I wanted to make sure he knew that what he saw on that screen was completely different than what happens in real life. That war is sad and guns are extremely dangerous.
To the best of your knowledge, do you know why Jesse was interested in these war-themed games?
Yeah, Jesse, he loved superheroes, especially Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. He wanted to be responsible for saving people, saving lives, and he thought being in the military would be that responsibility.
Mr. Duran, I have to talk to you about August 18th of 2010. How did that day begin for you?
Andy agreed to let Jesse come over that day when I went to work. We got up early, around 9 o'clock. I walked Jesse next door, and that's when I found out that Danny, Sydney's normal babysitter, wasn't going to be there that day.
How did you feel about this?
Well, it made me kind of nervous that we had never left the two home alone for more than a couple hours. But I talked to Andy. She said our neighbor Keith would come over every so often, come and make the kids lunch, hang out for a bit, and Andy and I would call and check in every so often too. So we both went off to work together.
And when was the next time that you heard from your son?
He called me frantic. He said something had happened. He needed me to rush home, so I did. And then at 10:15, I got this call from the Midland State Police saying there had been an incident on my way home. And that's when I knew I had to get home as soon as possible. I needed to get to Jesse.
And did you end up getting home that day?
It took a while. There were cop cars and ambulances all up the street. I finally got home. I rushed into the Parks home, and I saw a body lying there under a sheet. I didn't know where my son was. I was freaking out, and 2 officers escorted me to the dining room.
What was in the dining room?
I was so relieved Jesse was sitting there, but he looked so scared. There were 2 police officers next to him, and I went up to hug him, but they wouldn't even let me touch him. I just had to sit next to him. We couldn't say much to each other.
Did you find out that day what had happened on August 18th?
Yeah, I did.
been here in trial, for upstage trial, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
So you've heard that, or have you heard that Mrs. Park kept a gun in her home?
Yeah, they had told me before that, after their house had been broken into, they had bought a gun for protection.
Did you know about this on August 18th when you left Jesse and Sydney alone in that home?
I did, but I knew Andy used to be in the military. She had worked with guns before. I thought that gun was going to be stored where those two would not be able to get to it.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. This time, Your Honor, no further questions.